E o último painel do dia busca explorar.
And now the last panel of the day aims to explore the potential of the financial development institutions in the implementation of the 2030 agenda at the local level. Bearing in mind the possibilities of activity and capillarity of such institutions, to compose our panel, we invite Stephany Griffith-Jones, Professor of Columbia University, Rogério Studart, Senior Fellow from the Brazilian Center of International Relations, Saloua Sehili, Director of Strategy with the African Development Bank, AfDB, and Emilie Maehara, Joint Executive Director of Global Fund for Cities Development. Our moderator will be Henrique Pissaia, Chief of Staff of DC Fonplata, who now has the floor. Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. Good evening to some of our speakers who are almost reaching Thursday, depending on the time zones. Our last panel is quite the international one, so we will establish a lot of connections with the national experiences and international practices, the best practices, experiences we can replicate. So since this is our last panel, it is the last and the most important one. So I will give you 7 minutes for a first round, for a first intervention, and then we have a round of questions, and I propose an order. We would start with Rogério Studart, then Emilie Maehara, and then Saloua Sehili and Stephany Griffith-Jones. Rogério, taking into account your long experience in working with the development and the work you have been developing in CEBRI, how do you see the potential of banks and development agencies, the regional and subnational development agencies, in the work we have ahead? Okay, I'll try to be brief because I will be followed by people who are much more knowledgeable than myself in this topic. So I'll try to be very brief. I would like to greet you all. It is my pleasure to be in this fantastic panel. I'd like to congratulate ABDE and its members for this initiative, and I'll go straight into it. I'll try to be a bit bold in this subject. Well, first experience with development was in 1992 in my PhD thesis. So I have been working with development and funding for 30 years in a very positive experience. I would like to explain why it's so important to understand the importance and the relevance of these types of institutions in the current day. Well, my trajectory in terms of the academic journey is, which is quite interesting. I start to work with Schumpeter and ECLAC, a very strong influence of ECLAC, but I saw a great importance when I started working more contact with Keynes, and I understood the importance of economic development. Keynes is very broad and very brilliant to be addressed briefly, but the basic idea of Keynes, who is actually a liberal, is a person who wanted to preserve the liberal economic order, is that the market economies, because they are determined by investments in their economic cycles and for living in a significant uncertainty situation, they are economies that have a very strong cyclical propension. Keynes is basic theory is to show that the role of the state could smooth and avoid destabilization of an economic order. And that leads to the role of the state as a stabilizer of cycles, but also the state is the creator of horizons that allow the market to develop. This has significant implications for development, the theme of development. Development is characterized by continuous structural changes. All of the experiences and of development, you move from one point to another, and you have to overcome constant structural changes that create uncertainties and that lead to resistance to long-term investments. In these situations, the state has a role that goes beyond the mere avoidance of market defaults or failures, which has become the normal way of thinking in developing institutions. The state has the fundamental role to be a lighthouse, to indicate the pathway society should tread, and where the private sector can anchor its investment decisions. So when you look at development on Keynesian perspective, you understand the role of the state, you generate a vision for society, you create a coordination among different institutions in the various activities, and also you address policy tools. One of the most important policy tools is development, because development helps the states, and you can see that in the day-to-day work with development, and it helps the states to build this vision and also implements the same vision. So the conclusion I came to after all of these years is that development banks are fundamental whenever you have a development project. It's not by chance that all countries from China to the United States, Germany, France, South Korea, when they proposed structural changes that led to development, the development banks had very critical roles. This is what we should understand. It is a mistake to see development banks as things to cover market failures. They are actually policy instruments, policy tools for us to solve structural problems that leads to the moment that where we are currently. It would be redundant to say that we are living in a moment of many uncertainties regarding the increase of inequality, uncertainties regarding the impact of climate change, about the future of production and distribution, uncertainty about the disruptive technologies that are being introduced, and they, as the name states, they disrupt the functioning of the markets, and when they don't work, they disrupt even more. So it's a very delicate geopolitical moment as well, internationally speaking, and the state presenting a vision to where society is moving towards, and having the tools to implement that vision is something fundamental. And I have only 1.5 minutes left, so we come to the point of the local banks. The mission is too big to one bank alone, or just a few banks at a federal level to bring it forward. You have to have some capillarity in a coordinated manner for the implementation of policies from the beginning to the end of the policy. So I believe that in Brazil, development institutions at this moment of great uncertainty, there is the need to rediscover a complementary development method, and that makes these institutions fundamental. You need to support them, and more than that, we need society to understand its importance so that they can initiate a new development process, and Brazil needs it. We have 14 million people unemployed, a lot of food insecurity, and millions of people living in poverty. So we need a new recovery. So I'll stop here and give the floor back to our moderator. I'm looking forward to my fellow panelists. Thank you. Very interesting reflections after over 30 years of work with this area. I will make a comment before I give the floor to Emilie. You made some general comments. Director Emilie from AfDB has a lot of experience in field work in cities all over the country. So, Emilie, how do you see all of these explanations and these development matters, not as much in terms of green development and uncertainty, but development itself? What do you in AfDB and your experience with subnational development banks that you coordinate with your team, what practices do you see in the world that can be replicated in Brazil? And very briefly again, in 7 minutes.
Okay, nice to see you. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Emilie Maehara. I'm the Deputy Director of the Global Fund for Cities Development, FMDV, which is an international network of local governments dedicated to promoting solutions to finance and invest in cities. So I'm very honored to participate in this panel together with you, dear fellow panelists, colleagues, and friends. So, first of all, I'd like to start with a remark on the issue of financing local development. So, as we know, unlocking financing at the subnational level is a prerequisite to reaching the 2030 agenda. At the global level, it's acknowledged that 65% of the SDGs may not be fully achieved by 2030 without the involvement of local actors. However, the deficit in urban and local infrastructure investment to achieve the SDGs is estimated to be around $1 trillion a year, and we are faced with a massive systemic market failure of subnational financing, with an insufficient connection between the supply and the demand side for financing. So despite a large set of credit lines and instruments set up for urban development, local governments and stakeholders still hardly access to the required financing, both for project preparation and the investment itself. This systemic failure is mainly due to inadequate institutional frameworks, a lack of capacities and creditworthiness of local governments, or because projects are being considered either too small or not bankable enough. So, as the only network of local governments specialized on financing, FMDV develops and promotes solutions to better connect cities and regions to financing. We do this through operational programs in support of national and local governments, multi-stakeholder dialogues, knowledge production, and advocacy. We have worked with 1,500 cities in 100 countries, and we have supporting the mobilization of $1 billion for cities over the five past years. So among these innovative solutions, FMDV has been strongly engaged since 2014 in advocating the role of subnational development banks in the UN agendas. We have obtained the recognition in the new urban agenda and the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action. So what we call subnational development banks, SDBs, are public development banks and financing institutions with a specific mandate to provide financing to local government and stakeholders. They can either be national development banks or state-owned banks in federal countries like Brazil, where they have demonstrated their immense potential to act as banks of the last mile and unlock finance at the local level. And I guess you had the opportunity to hear about the fabulous experiences of many Brazilian SDBs since yesterday. So as financial intermediaries, their mandate is to catalyze public and private finance and to channel it to local governments and stakeholders. Thanks to their knowledge of local contexts, and particularly local governments, and thanks to their ability to lend in local currency, they can offer both financial support as well as technical assistance for project preparation to structure pipelines of bankable projects. All these characteristics provide them with a strategic added value in partnering with local and national governments as well as with development finance institutions. So SDBs can act as focal points for local financing, pooling the demand for local projects and matching them with investment from public and private resources. They can act as project takers as well as market and policy makers to structure subnational financial markets and align local development with the global agenda. For all these reasons, FMDV has supported the launch in April 2021 of an alliance of SDBs in Latin America and the Caribbean, with the initial support of BDMG, AfD, and IDRI. This multi-stakeholder alliance is a Financing Common initiative. So the Financing Common is the global summit gathering 500 public development banks committed to finance the global agendas. The alliance gathers SDBs, DFIs, local governments, and think tanks and academia with the aim to strengthen the capacity of SDBs to broaden and improve their services offered to local governments and actors, and to consolidate portfolios of local projects to finance just local urban and territorial transitions. It allows what you have described, Rogério, in your presentation. That means to develop dialogue and a better cooperation between all levels of development banks and to reinforce the capillarity of development banks at the local level. So the Alliance Steering Committee is now composed of 22 members, among which several Brazilian SDBs, such as BDMG, BRDE, Banco de Amazonia, and of course ABDE, as well as multilateral development banks and regional development banks active in the region. The World Bank, CAF, IDB, CABE, Fonplata, as well as the European Union, UNDP, ECLAC, ALIDE, and many others. And FMDV is pleased to manage its secretariat. We have achieved significant results since the launch of the Alliance with the organization of the session during the last Financing Common Summit held in Rome in partnership with the African Development Bank. This session allowed to achieve a recognition of SDBs in the Public Development Bank galaxy, and it was an occasion to showcase a position paper on the role of SDBs to finance a resilient urban and territorial post-COVID recovery. In particular, how SDBs can efficiently channel funds from national governments and MDBs at the local level. This paper has been drafted as an outcome of the first peer-to-peer workshop of the Alliance, in which both Professor Griffith-Jones and Fonplata provided great inputs. The COP26 in Glasgow was also a key venue to showcase the added value of this alliance in many events, and together with the African Alliance of SDBs, we released a global declaration of SDBs during the COP26 Finance Day. So today, you are welcome to all join our next activities. On April 22, we will organize a peer-to-peer workshop on the theme of developing de-risking instruments and guarantee mechanisms and the role of SDBs with the support of the IDB. On May 19, we will organize a session during the General Assembly of ALIDE. In June or July, we will organize an annual forum with a workshop on financing the climate resilience in cities and territories, and the venue in Latin America is still to be defined. In October, we will organize an event during the next Financing Summit at the invitation of the African Development Bank and EIB in Abidjan, and we will also be present in COP in Egypt. So in the coming months, we're also going to engage in global exchanges with a new financing common thematic coalition on resilient cities. So please, you are all invited to join our work and engage in dynamic exchanges and cooperation in support of financing the implementation of the 2030 agenda at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Emilie. Muito obrigado, Emilie. Obrigado.
Thank you, Emilie, for sharing this excellent work you've been doing at your alliance, and also for the excellent work of FMDV, and following on along the lines of, we spoke at length about the global strategy with Rogério, and now we will talk about what is being done within the alliances of subnational banks with Director Saloua of the African Development Bank. And so we want to know more about this strategy, specifically in Africa, which is generally seen as a single bloc, but it has more than 50 countries, each with its specificities and peculiarities. And so what are the strategies, and how does the African Bank, and your experience, what do you have to say about, what are your thoughts on the potential of subnational development? 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I am happy to be here. Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to represent the African Development Bank at the 7th Brazilian Development Forum, led by the Brazilian Development Association, ABGE, and to see also several of the important colleagues from FMDV that we've collaborated with recently as well. The African, just to give you an idea about the African Development Bank Group, it's a multilateral regional bank with a development mandate for Africa. Our shareholders are regional and non-regional members, and the non-regional members actually include this wonderful country, Brazil. The bank group is led by our president, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. The group is composed of the African Development Bank, providing non-concessional finance, the African Development Fund, providing concessional finance, and the Nigerian Trust Fund. We also provide technical support and advisory services. Just to tell you a little bit about the role of Brazil in the African Development Bank, Brazil joined the African Development Bank in 1973 and the African Development Fund in 1982. Brazil's technical cooperation with the bank is dominated by support for agriculture, health, and education, which accounts for about half of the technical cooperation. Furthermore, in 2011, the government of Brazil and the bank group signed an agreement to establish a new South-South Cooperation Trust Fund with an untied grant of USD 6 million to promote cooperation with African countries who are members of the bank group. So we very much value and appreciate Brazil's role in the development and the South-South cooperation of our African continent. The bank group, similarly to all MDBs, signed on to the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. They are also aligned with our long-term strategy for 2013-2022, focusing on inclusive growth and the transition to green growth. President Adesina designated 5 priority areas to accelerate our implementation of our strategy and the development on the African continent. They focus on energy, agriculture and food security, regional integration, industrialization, and improving the quality of life for Africans, which includes health, education, access to water, supply and sanitation, etc. Our areas of special emphasis include the environment, climate change and adaptation, gender, and fragility. As you know, we have many pockets of fragility and even fragile states. We are also endeavoring for a just transition for Africa in the context of the Paris Agreement. Over the past 6 years, the bank group has provided about USD 39 billion in financing to the continent in support of the high 5 priorities, impacting the lives of over 335 million people. 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic led to a decline, unfortunately, in Africa's GDP growth of 2.1% in 2020. Africa's GDP fell by $165 billion. Over 30 million jobs were lost, and over 26 million people fell in extreme poverty. In response, our board of directors approved a crisis response facility of up to 10 billion USD. The bank also launched a USD 3 billion fight COVID-19 social bond on the international capital markets, which was the largest ever US dollar denominated social bond in world history. Now, recognizing the importance of sustainable urban and subnational development, the bank group, under the leadership of President Adesina, established the Urban Development Division in 2016. In 2019, the bank approved its subnational finance guidelines, formalizing the bank's approach to subnational development and opening the door for direct support to subnational governments and other subnational entities such as subnational development banks, municipal development funds, utilities, etc. Concurrently, and recognizing that project preparation and capacity are two of the biggest hurdles to subnational development, the bank established the Urban Municipal Development Fund, a multi-donor trust fund that provides technical assistance and capacity building in support of municipal and subnational development. All these synergistic actions demonstrate our commitment to subnational and urban development. And of course, we recognize the central role that subnational development banks play in pooling resources, mitigating risks, extending the repayment period, and pooling knowledge and technical assistance skills. We are also working on a new strategy that would address urban development and subnational development. Now, just to tell you a little bit about what we have enabled, which we were not able to do before 2019. So subject to specific eligibility criteria that mitigate various risks, such as credit and fiduciary risks, the bank group has made it possible for eligible subnational governments and entities to access most financing instruments. For example, the bank can provide sovereign guaranteed and or non-sovereign guaranteed loans, line of credit, partial risk and partial credit guarantee to lower the costs of borrowing and extend bond maturities, and equity investments in subnational development banks. For example, in 2019, the bank provided a 20 million euro line of credit to Morocco's municipal fund. We also provide grant resources. We also provide grant resources from multi-donor trust funds for the environment and climate adaptation and mitigation. So, the impact of the COVID crisis has had somewhat of a negative impact on our subnational program, as resources were diverted to deal with the crisis. However, we hope that this will pick up the pace. Brazil's experience in this space, in subnational development, has been invaluable to us, and lessons learned have been reflected in our policies and approach, most notably debt sustainability, which, as you may know, is a salient issue in many of our African countries. We are delighted with the exemplary South-South cooperation with Brazil, and we look forward to further interaction and collaboration on this most important subject, which is subnational development and subnational development banks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director Saloua. Muito obrigado.
It is a pleasure to hear you talking about the South-South Trust Fund. I participated in this project, and we have really good ideas and thoughts of resuming this with ABD. It's a good time to do so. I also took note of what you said on COVID, urban infrastructure, and the work, subnational work done. We are going to resume this discussion in our next round, but let's move on to Professor Stephany Griffith-Jones. you have been working for some time with development, and we moved from macro development and development of strategies in Africa. How have you, well, since you have been working a lot with the region and advocate for the last mile, the importance of the last mile, I'll ask you to, in 7 minutes, talk about the potential of subnational development.
For inviting me to this important conference and panel. I'm delighted to be in a panel which is 75% amongst the speakers women, which is rather rare, especially in the financial area. And I'm very happy that this is the case. And also, I'm involved in the Chilean government, working in the central bank, and I would also like to say that this new government has a majority of ministers who are women. So things are moving forward. Turning to the subject of the panel, I would like to stress the importance, start by stressing the importance of subnational development banks. And I think looking at it from a sort of theoretical perspective, it is one way, as Stiglitz would say, of fighting asymmetries of information. Because all banks have asymmetries of information, but if you are close to the region, to the companies, to the projects, these asymmetries of information are, of course, reduced. And I think that these banks of the last mile, as Sergio Guzmán likes to call them, rightly, are valuable for the regions because they can provide funding with greater knowledge of the local areas, but they're also valuable instruments for multinational development banks, regional development banks, and national development banks, because they're an instrument that they can use to make sure that the funds that they are dispersing are dispersed with the maximum development impact and benefit from all this local knowledge. I want to talk a little bit about the general conclusions of the conference held in Paris, which applies both to national development banks, regional ones, and of course subnational ones. I would like to stress one conclusion that has come out, and I think is very important, is the need for sufficient scale. Because I think to have an impact in any of their functions, whether it's counter-cyclical, like dealing recently with the COVID crisis, whether it's financing structural transformation towards greener and more inclusive economies, whether it is funding especially more inclusive development by special support to SMEs, or by funding public goods, particularly climate change, which is so urgent. I think scale is very important to have sufficient impact. Development banks in total are already very large. The latest estimates of IDFC and AfD is that they have total assets, if we consider multilateral, regional, national, and subnational. The total assets are about $11 trillion, which is a very important amount. And at an annual level, these banks tend to disburse amounts of around $2.5 trillion, which represents already 10% of global investment. But given the massive challenges that we face, particularly the need for a transition to a greener economy to deal with the climate emergency, and I've just today benefited from hearing Nick Stern talking about the urgency of the need to increase financing for investment in the green transition. I think given these challenges, the scale of existing development banks, and particularly the sub-regional ones,
it needs to be importantly increased. So that's one first conclusion, which came out very clearly. The second one is, of course, to improve also analytical tools to be able to monitor and evaluate the instruments used and their impact in all the projects. Because it is particularly difficult but also important to evaluate impact of transactions of development banks because they have a double purpose. They of course want to be sustainable financially and they don't want to make losses, but their main aim is to have impact on development. So the job is actually much harder than the job of a normal commercial bank, which has only one purpose, which is to maximize their commercial returns. So I think the challenge of improving analytical tools and the work that is being done at institutions like AfDB and others represented here is of course very important. I think the third element is that these banks shouldn't be project takers, but project makers. That is, the banks should define the sectors, the projects, the missions, as it's fashionable to call, which are of most importance for maximizing the impact of development. And often, on their own, the financial sector will not fund it because these new sectors and new projects often are very uncertain or carry very high risk, but particularly in situations of uncertainty. And therefore, it is very important for development banks to play a sort of leading, pioneering role, showcasing these sectors and projects. A fourth, I think, conclusion from the conference was that leverage with the private sector, particularly the private financial sector, is very important because it helps provide more funds. But I think it's important at the same time is to emphasize that development banks shouldn't take excessive contingency risk because that could weaken them. And that they should also, where the projects that they are funding become very profitable, they should also capture the upside. That is, they should benefit of the profits, the high profits which emerge in some projects. So I would like to actually just illustrate, because we're talking also about COVID, the case of one very successful funding which was provided by the European Investment Bank and the European Commission to fund research which led to the development of the Pfizer vaccine. This was a small loan, supplemented later by a lot of financial capital, private capital, but initially, when the investment was most risky, it was funded by the EIB and the European Commission. And I think this is an important example of how public development banks can play a key role in funding activities which have a major global public good impact. I would also like to stress the importance of financial regulation, including of a development bank, and how this financial regulation can encourage investment in important public goods, such as mitigating and adapting to climate change. I think there's initiating a phase of work amongst the financial regulators and the central banks, doing important research, but I think it would be hoped that we will move from research and studying to actual financial regulation initiatives, which will facilitate both the public development banks and the private financial sector to encourage greater financing for the green transition. Finally, I would like to say that, of course, an integration, a greater integration, a better coordination that we seem to be moving towards would be very valuable, and that the better that multilaterals, regional, national, and subnational banks collaborate, fund each other, learn from each other, will improve the system. And I think the kind of work that is being carried out by ABDE and other institutions of a similar nature is particularly valuable in this respect. So there is both sort of funding flows going amongst these different categories of banks, but also the technical knowledge, for example, and with this I finish, about the best tools to use, whether they're loans, guarantees, particularly valuable in times of uncertainty or for sectors where there is more uncertainty. But even more also thinking about equity or equity-like instruments which can make a very important contribution, both for capturing the upside, but also for allowing encouragement of new activities. In fact, because COVID has led to so much expansion of credit and so much credit leverage in companies, I think the value of equity is also particularly valuable for the companies themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I will stay. Eu vou ficar.
I will. Well, we just had the first round of interventions. We now have a second round of interventions. I will continue with you, Professor Griffith. You said, Madam, that this was the first, one of the few panels in which the representation of male and females is 75% female, right? So how do you see the local development banks? How can subnational and local development banks help us breach this gender gap that we have? I know this is a long topic, but we are at the end of our time, so I would like to collect your opinion on this.
I mean, I think, of course, we all know that women tend to have lower salaries, to be underrepresented in economic activity, and there is a major task, I think, to be done, for example, in improving access to female entrepreneurs. I know that, for example, the African Development Bank is very active in this area. And I know that some of the Brazilian development banks are as well. Because if we don't do that, we are really minimizing the valuable talent that is potentially being provided by half the population. Because we are leaving out women who, for example, because they don't have good childcare facilities and so on, they cannot benefit sufficiently. So I think, as well as climate change and inclusiveness in general, I think an important aim for development banks, but also I think more broadly the financial system, is to promote greater gender equality.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all this. For all these words, and obrigado por todas as.
Thank you for your words, and moving on with our debates. Director Saloua, you talked a lot about the challenges of COVID and the challenge of to the subnational banks in the last year. How do you see the situation, also establishing a link with gender gap and the issuing of green bonds? How do you see the future of the African Development Bank when facing all of these challenges? Gender, green bonds, climate change, COVID, and subnational banks. So we have 3 minutes. We are at the end of our day. So you have the floor, Madam, please.
Thank you very much. These are very important.
Yes, go ahead, please.
very important issues and very important questions. Basically, regards gender, we have placed a huge emphasis on gender equality. We have established a whole unit to work on this area. We have created a new initiative, Affirmative Finance Action for Women, to facilitate financing for women entrepreneurs in Africa. All our projects have a gender marker, which analyzes how the project will impact women and what we can do to improve the impact on women. So we take the gender dimension extremely seriously. With respect to COVID, we responded, by providing immediately. This was the very quick response that we could provide, which also other multilateral development banks did through crisis budget support. So to shore up the government's regional member countries' budgets, so they are able to handle the COVID crisis, provide the health care, the vaccines, save, if you like, or provide some cushion for small and medium-sized enterprises. So this was the first line of business. Now, social bonds, we did that in record time, but these instruments, do take a little bit of time, so they would take more time than for us to approve crisis response bonds. But we have been very successful in issuing these types of bonds, and I think there is a huge interest from the markets, the international markets, in social bonds, green bonds, and this is a very rich and promising area for investment in our countries, even for Brazil and other countries in Latin America. What was the other dimension? Sorry.
No, it's okay. Just to have this view of the challenges we're facing. I think it's you clarify very well what you're doing, and I have to proceed because we have shortage of time. Thank you. Rogério.
Rogério, you spoke at length of uncertainties and of the era of uncertainties and climate change problems. In 2 minutes, if you can, 2 minutes, I'll speak in less.
I'm very happy that we have a majority of women here. I do believe now, it's not just a matter of saying that if the world was led by many more women, we wouldn't be in the mess that we are. And we are in a mess. We are in a world of multi-crisis. And this is a multi-crisis. We have a climate emergency. We have a poverty crisis and development crisis. You have a geopolitical crisis. We have a globalization crisis. And this makes the issue of development, makes us, there's a need to rethink development amidst this. Let me explain very quickly in 50 seconds. Many of our developing countries have invested a lot in an outward-looking global integration from south to north. We became specialized in commodities, industrialization declined, and we have now a situation where globalization is taking a turn and things are being challenged. And we have to be concerned about all kinds of security. The security in terms of the transition to a more resilient economy, transition towards food security, transition for a more self-sustained economy. Now, this poses a very difficult question. I haven't seen a question to the development at that level since the post-war world. This is where we are. And I think that the states, the instruments of policy, like development banks, are critical that. And I think the development banks should be looking around, and the society has to understand the enormity of the challenge they had and the role that this institution has to play. And we have to do it quickly. It doesn't suffice. Business as usual is not sufficient. We do not have time. Development is at risk. The planet is at risk. And that's the challenge that I leave for you all. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Emilie, como você, a senhora vê
Emilie, how do you see FMDV and the alliance? How can you support and what can you do to address these challenges that we discussed? In 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Henrique. First of all, I'd like to really comment and support on what the other panelists said, and also to highlight that local and regional governments are in the front line to answer all these huge challenges. And during the COVID crisis, they were short of resources, and they had to respond to the immediate needs of populations and to tackle all these challenges together. And I think that we need to trust this local level and really to give them, to give local governments the resources to act. So this is This is the main objective of this alliance, is to allow a better cooperation, to channel these funds at the local level and to really give the real power to local actors to implement the global challenges and to the global agendas in response to global challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Eu sei que 1 hora é muito pouco para.
I know that 1 hour is too little for such deep discussions. We would need a whole day for each. I have 1 minute. I can allow 1 minute for final. 1 minute to each of you for final remarks. We'll start with Professor Stephany.
I think the fact, as Rogério mentioned, that we have these very large challenges, and particularly the challenge of climate change, but also the needs for inclusive development, means that the role that development banks at all levels need to play is extremely crucial. And we need to be both qualitative but also quantitatively, including a larger scale of resources, would be very essential. And it is also in the interest of governments to leverage the resources they put into development banks with private funds. It is a means of what is sometimes called doing more with less. So from a variety of angles, the need for a change of the development model, the need for structural transformation, to act quickly in crises, I think the role of development banks, particularly subnational ones, needs to be further increased.
Thank you. Saloua, Sehili.
Saloua, Sehili.
Thank you very much. I would like to say I strongly believe in people voting with their feet and expressing their preferences at the local level. And this, of course, requires the needed resources to satisfy those choices and those preferences. Also, subnational development, facilitates inclusiveness and equity or equality. And, as you are aware, many of the insecurity events that happen throughout the world are due to regional disparities. So subnational development, with the support of subnational banks and subnational governments, is essential to improve the lives of the citizenry and to maintain security, which would lead to inclusiveness and prosperity for all, as the SDGs seek to achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Saloua. Emilie, please, 1 minute for your closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Henrique. So, as a complement to what I said, the need to support local governments to access financing through the role of subnational development banks, I'd like to recall that all the actions of local governments are at the service of local communities and of populations. So if we give means and financial means to local governments, we will be able to improve democracy at the local level, peace, stability, to fight against climate change, and what is equity and development. In fact, the first thing is to allow a real and equal access to all people to high quality public services. So it's not a technical discussion. It's really a critical discussion to allow to improve the conditions of life of people and to answer all these complex global challenges thanks to the local action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emilie. Rogério, 1 minuto para...
Rogério, 1 minute for your final remarks.
I think if I could leave a message here. Until very recently, we look at development banks and institutions, like institutions, as complementary, as just providing a complement to the private sector that would be leading the future that they have already been projected. I want to draw your attention to the fact that we need to build the future now, because what we have in terms of the trajectory of the future is collapsing in terms of climate, in terms of inequality, access to food, and now geopolitical and globalization. Now it is the time for those institutions not just to complement, but taking a lead in helping build a new and better future. This is not just rhetoric. Everywhere, that's the conversation that everybody's having. And I think the developing countries have to come to terms with this. The development banks are not anymore just complementary. They are instruments to build a new future. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you all. And, well, 1 hour is too little, truly too little. I hope we will have more opportunities, and the role of subnational development banks is crucial. We have the perfect forum to discuss this. And have a good evening.
Boa noite.